Captain Jae-wook Kim stood on the bridge of his ship, the Persistence, and stared at the screen before him. The signal was weak, but it was there. Someone was calling for help from the Theta Centauri system, 3 days away at full speed. "Bora, what do you think?" he asked his navigator. Bora Lee had been with him for 5 years now, and he trusted her judgment more than anyone else on the ship. She looked at the data on her screen and frowned. "The signal is coming from the 4th planet. It's not one of the Council worlds. The records say it's home to the Kalari, but there's no recent contact information." Jae-wook nodded. The Galactic Council kept detailed records of all known species, but some were marked as low priority. The Kalari must be one of those. He had never heard of them before. "Taemin, how long would it take us to get there?" he called to his engineer. "Taemin." Park looked up from his control panel. 3 days if we push the engines, but sir, we're supposed to be mapping the outer rim. Command won't be happy if we change course. Jae-wook thought about this. He had orders to survey empty space and look for new planets. It was boring work, but someone had to do it. Still, a distress signal was a distress signal. As a captain in the human space fleet, he had a duty to help anyone who needed it. Set course for Theta Centauri, he decided. If someone needs help, we're going to help them. The next 3 days passed slowly. Jae-wook spent most of his time reading what little information they had about the Kalari. They were an amphibious species, meaning they could live both in water and on land. They had been discovered by the Council about 50 years ago, but there had been very little contact since then. The records called them peaceful and non-aggressive, which usually meant they didn't have much technology or military power. Dr. Hye-jin Choi, the ship's medical officer, was excited about the possibility of meeting a new species. She had studied xenobiology in school and loved learning about different forms of life. "The Kalari might have completely different biology from us," she told Jae-wook. "This could be a great opportunity to learn something new." When they finally reached the Theta Centauri system, what they found was not what any of them expected. The Yaoane, 4th planet, was dying. "Sir," Bora said, her voice tight with worry. "The star is expanding. It's getting hotter and brighter. The planet's oceans are starting to boil." Jae-wook stared at the screen. The planet that should have been blue and green was brown and orange. Huge clouds of steam rose from what used to be oceans. He could see the shapes of continents, but they looked burned and empty. "How long do they have?" he asked. Taemin ran some quick calculations. "Maybe 6 months, maybe less. When the star finishes expanding, the whole planet will be uninhabitable." "And the distress signal?" "Still coming from the northern continent. There's a large city there, built on what used to be a coastline." Jae-wook made his decision quickly. "Take us down. We need to make contact." The Persistence landed outside the Kalari city just as the local sun was setting. Even through the ship's protective shields, Jae-wook could feel the heat. The air shimmered with steam and the ground was cracked and dry. This world was definitely dying. The Kalari who met them were unlike anything Jae-wook had seen before. They stood about as tall as humans, but their skin was smooth and wet, like a dolphin's. They had large eyes and webbed fingers, clearly built for life in the water. Now, with their oceans boiling away, they looked tired and sick. Their leader introduced herself as Elder Dasam. She spoke through a translation device, her voice filled with sadness. "We thank you for coming," she said. "We have been calling for help for many months, but no one has answered. The Council told us there was nothing they could do." "The Council knows about your situation?" Jae-wook asked. "Yes. They sent a representative last year. He said our star's expansion was a natural process and that they could not interfere. He said it was our time to end." Jae-wook felt anger growing in his chest. The Galactic Council had ships that could move entire populations. They had technology that could terraform new worlds. They could easily save the Kalari if they wanted to. "How many of your people are still alive?" he asked. "About 2 million, Elder Dasam replied. "We were once 50 million, but many have already died from the heat and the poisoned air. Our children are the weakest. They cannot survive much longer." That night, Jae-wook called an emergency meeting with his crew. They gathered in the small conference room, and he could see the same anger in their faces that he felt in his heart. "We owe Have to do something, Dr. Hyjin said immediately. We can't just leave them here to die. I agree, said Bora. But our ship can only carry maybe 1,000 people at most. And where would we take them? Taemin was already working on his tablet. I've been looking at our star charts. There's an uninhabited system about 10 light-years from here. 3 planets in the habitable zone, 2 of them have water. We could take some Kalari there at least. Some isn't enough, Jae-wook said firmly. It's all or nothing. 2 million people deserve to live. Sir, Bora said carefully, we'd need a whole fleet to move that many people, and we'd need permission from Command and the Council. This isn't something we can do on our own. Jae-wook was about to respond when his communication panel beeped. An incoming message from Earth, marked urgent. He accepted the call, and the face of diplomat Shiwoo Han appeared on the screen. Shiwoo was a human who worked directly with the Galactic Council. Jae-wook had met him a few times at official ceremonies, but they weren't friends. Shiwoo always seemed more concerned with following rules than doing what was right. Captain Kim, Shiwoo said, his voice cold and formal. I understand you've made contact with the Kalari species on Theta Centauri 4. Yes, sir. They're in desperate need of help. Their star is expanding and their world is dying. I'm aware of the situation. The Council reviewed their case last year and made their decision. The Kalari are to be left alone. This falls under the Abandonment Protocol. Jae-wook had never heard that term before. The what? The Abandonment Protocol. When a species faces extinction due to natural causes and lacks the technology to save themselves, they are considered evolutionarily insufficient. The Council does not waste resources on species that cannot adapt or advance. You're talking about 2 million lives, Jae-wook said, his voice getting louder. Innocent people who just want to survive. I'm talking about the natural order of the galaxy, Shiwoo replied. Species rise and fall all the time. The Council only supports those who show promise for advancement. The Kalari have had 50 years to develop space travel or stellar engineering. They chose not to. Now they must face the consequences. Dr. Hyjin stepped forward. That's not how evolution works. Intelligence and compassion are just as important as technology. The Kalari might have knowledge and abilities we don't understand. Shiwoo's expression didn't change. The decision is final, Captain Kim. You are ordered to leave the system immediately and continue your original mission. Any interference with the Kalari will be considered a violation of Council law. And if I refuse? Jae-wook asked. Then humanity will be marked as a defiant species. Our trading rights, our membership in the Council, our protection under galactic law, all of it will be at risk. You would be making outcasts of your entire species for the sake of primitives who are already doomed. The communication ended, leaving the conference room in silence. Jae-wook looked around at his crew. He could see the conflict in their faces. They all wanted to help the Kalari, but the price seemed impossibly high. Sir, Bora said quietly, maybe there's another way. Maybe we could appeal to the Council directly or find some loophole in their laws. Jae-wook thought about Elder Dasam and the dying children in the city below. He thought about the 2 million Kalari who would be dead in 6 months while the galaxy did nothing. Then he thought about what it meant to be human. Humans had always been fighters. When their own world was threatened by climate change and war, they had found ways to survive and grow stronger. When they first reached space, they had been welcomed by some species and rejected by others, but they had never given up. The thing that made humans special wasn't their technology or their military power. It was their refusal to abandon others in need. He stood up and looked at his crew. I want you all to understand what we're about to do. If we help the Kalari, we're going against the most powerful organization in the galaxy. We might never be able to go home again. Our families might suffer because of our choice. But sir, Taemin said, we can't just let them die. No, Jae-wook agreed. We can't. He activated the ship's communication system and opened a channel to Elder Dasam. When her face appeared on the screen, he could see hope and fear fighting in her large eyes. Elder Dasam, he said, I want you to know that humanity stands with the Kalari. We're going to find a way to save your people. But the Council, she began. The council can go to hell, Jaewook said firmly. If helping you makes us outcasts, then we'll be outcasts together. Behind him, he heard his crew cheering softly. Dr. Hyojin was wiping tears from her eyes, and even Bora was smiling. They had made their choice. Now they had to figure out how to move 2 million people across the galaxy without getting them all killed in the process. The next morning, Jaewook stood in the Kalari city's main hall surrounded by dozens of their people. The heat was getting worse every day, and he could see the strain on their faces. Many of the younger Kalari were already showing signs of heat sickness, their usually bright skin looking dull and dry. Taman was working with a group of Kalari engineers trying to figure out how to modify human ships to carry amphibious passengers. The problem wasn't just space, it was life support. Kalari needed much more humidity and water than humans, and their biology was completely different. The good news, Taman explained to Jaewook, is that they don't need as much oxygen as we do. The bad news is that they need to keep their skin wet or they'll die within hours. We're going to need to flood our cargo holds with water and set up special breathing systems. Dr. Hyojin was running tests on Kalari biology, trying to understand exactly what they would need to survive the journey. She had set up a small medical station in the city's center, and Kalari families were bringing their sick children to her. Their immune systems are failing because of the heat, she told Jaewook. The children are the worst affected. We need to get them off this planet soon, or we're going to start losing them. Bora had been working on something even more important, finding them a new home. She had spent the night studying star charts and planetary surveys, looking for a world that could support Kalari life. I found something, she announced during their morning briefing. There's an abandoned system called Kepler 442. It has 2 planets in the habitable zone, both with large oceans. The council surveyed it about 20 years ago but declared it unsuitable for advanced species because the gravity is a little high, and there are frequent storms. Sounds perfect for the Kalari, Jaewook said. What's the catch? It's 15 light-years away. Even with our fastest ships, it would take weeks to get there. And that's assuming we can get fast ships. Jaewook had been thinking about this problem all night. The Persistence could carry maybe 1,000 Kalari if they modified it completely, but that would leave 1.9 million still trapped on the dying world. They needed help and they needed it fast. I'm going to call in some favors, he decided. There are other human captains out there who might be willing to help if they knew the situation. Over the next few hours, Jaewook sent coded messages to every human ship captain he trusted. He couldn't say much over normal communication channels because the council monitored everything, but he hoped they would understand. The first response came from Captain Yoon Soo-yoon, who commanded a cargo hauler called the Bright Star. Jaewook had served with her during his early years in the fleet, and she had always been someone who put people before rules. Jaewook, you crazy fool! Her voice crackled over the communicator. I just heard about what you're doing from my friend on the transport ship New Hope. Are you really going up against the council for some aliens nobody's ever heard of? They're not some aliens, Jaewook replied. They're people, Eunsu. 2 million people who are going to die if we don't help them. There was a long pause. Then Eunsu laughed. Well, when you put it that way, how can I say no? The Bright Star isn't much, but she can carry about 800 passengers if we pack them in tight. When do you need me? By the end of the day, Jaewook had heard from 12 human captains. Some were military like him, others were civilian traders and explorers. All of them were willing to risk everything to help save the Kalari. The plan they came up with was simple but dangerous. They would modify as many ships as possible to carry Kalari passengers, then make multiple trips between Theta Centauri and the Kepler system. It would take weeks, maybe months, but they could get everyone to safety if they moved fast enough. Taman worked around the clock with the Kalari engineers to design the modifications they would need. It turned out that the Kalari were much better at biotechnology than humans had realized. They could grow special algae that would help purify the air and water systems, making the journey safer for everyone. They're not primitive at all, Taman told Jaewook excitedly. Their technology is just different from ours. Instead of building machines, they grow living systems that do the same job. Some of their biotechnology is centuries ahead of anything humans have developed. Dr. Hyojin was equally impressed by what she was learning. Their medical knowledge is incredible, she said. They can regrow lost limbs and cure diseases that would kill humans. The council was wrong to call them evolutionarily insufficient. They've just evolved in a different direction than most species. As the rescue fleet began to arrive, Jae-wook felt a mixture of hope and fear. Hope because they might actually be able to save the Kalari, but fear because he knew the council wouldn't let this happen without a fight. His fears proved correct when diplomat Shi Woo-han arrived on a council enforcement ship 3 days after the first rescue vessels reached Theta Centauri. Jae-wook met with Shi Woo on the Persistence with Bora and Dr. Hee-jin present as witnesses. Shi Woo looked angry and tired, like he hadn't slept in days. Captain Kim, Shi Woo began, you have violated direct orders from the council. There are now 15 human ships in this system, all preparing to interfere with a natural extinction event. This is not just insubordination, it's a crime against galactic law. The only crime here is letting 2 million innocent people die when we have the power to save them. Jae-wook replied, these aren't people, they're primitives. They've had 50 years to develop spaceflight and failed. They've had 50 years to solve their stellar engineering problems and failed. They are exactly the kind of species that the galaxy is better off without. Dr. Hyojin stepped forward, her face red with anger. How can you say that? I've been working with their doctors and scientists for days. They have knowledge and abilities that could benefit the entire galaxy. They're not primitives. They're just different. Different doesn't matter, Shi Woo said coldly. What matters is strength, technology, and the ability to survive on your own. The Kalari have proven they lack all three. Bora had been quiet during the argument, but now she spoke up. I've been studying the historical records, sir. Did you know that the Council has declared 47 species evolutionarily insufficient in the past century? 47 entire civilizations that were just left to die. Shi Woo nodded. And the galaxy is stronger because of it. Resources are limited. Space is limited. Territory is limited. Every species that survives takes something away from the species that deserve to live. Who decides who deserves to live? Jae-wook asked. The Council. The strongest, most advanced species in the galaxy. They've earned the right to make these decisions through millions of years of evolution and technological development. Jae-wook felt sick listening to this. He had always known that the Council favored some species over others, but he had never realized it was this bad. They weren't just neglecting the weak, they were actively allowing them to die. What happens if we continue with the evacuation? He asked. Shi Woo's expression grew grim. Humanity will be expelled from the Council. All trade agreements will be cancelled. All protection under galactic law will be removed. Human ships will be fired upon without warning if they enter Council space. And that's just the beginning. You're talking about making enemies of the most powerful species in the galaxy, he continued. The Raxan Empire, the Vorthan Confederacy, the Crystal Hierarchies. They all support the Council's decisions. Humanity would be alone against forces that could destroy Earth itself. The room fell silent. Jae-wook could see the fear in his crew's eyes, and he couldn't blame them. The consequences of what they were doing were enormous. But then he thought about the Kalari children he had seen that morning, lying sick in Dr. Hyojin's makeshift hospital. He thought about Elder Dasam and the quiet dignity with which she faced the death of her entire species. He thought about what it meant to be human. Shi Woo, he said quietly, I want you to send a message to the Council for me. What message? Tell them that Captain Jae-wook Kim of the human space fleet says, this, we will not abandon the Kalari. We will not abandon any species that needs our help. If that makes us enemies of the Council, then so be it. Humanity chooses compassion over comfort. Shi Woo stared at him for a long moment. You're going to doom your entire species for the sake of amphibious primitives who will probably die anyway. Maybe, Jae-wook admitted. But we'll die knowing we tried to do the right thing. Can the Council say the same? Shi Woo left without another word, his enforcement ship departing the system within hours. Jae-wook knew they didn't have much time. Before the Council sent something bigger and more dangerous. The evacuation began immediately. The modified human ships started loading Kalari families, with the children and elderly going first. It was slow, careful work. Each ship could only carry a few hundred passengers safely, and the journey to Kepler 442 took nearly 2 weeks. Captain Unsu took the first group of evacuees, her cargo ship packed with Kalari families and the special equipment they would need to start a new colony. Before she left, she visited Jaewook one last time. "You know we're probably never going to see Earth again," she told him. "I know. And you know the Council is going to do everything they can to stop us." "I know that too." 6 months after the Kalari rescue, Captain Jaewook Kim no longer commanded just one ship. He commanded a fleet of 43 vessels hidden in the Void Nebula, a dangerous region of space that most species avoided because of its radiation, storms, and unstable gravity fields. The fleet was a mix of everything: old cargo haulers, military escort ships, civilian transports, and even a few luxury liners, whose captains had decided that saving lives was more important than carrying rich passengers. They called themselves the Lifeline, and they had become the galaxy's most wanted criminals. Commodore Bora Lee stood next to Jaewook in the command center they had built inside the largest asteroid in the nebula. The rock had been hollowed out and turned into a base where rescued species could rest and recover before being taken to their new homes. "The latest intelligence from Shiwu says the Council is getting desperate," she reported. "They've increased patrols in all known systems with endangered species, and they're offering bounties for information about our location." Shiwu Han had surprised everyone by secretly joining their cause 3 months earlier. Officially, he was still a Council diplomat, but he had been feeding information to the Lifeline ever since he witnessed a Council fleet standing by while an entire world burned. "How many species have we saved now?" Jaewook asked. 17, Bora replied with pride. "The Kalari are doing well on New Kepler. The Vithak have established crystal farms on 3 different moons. The Nastari Collective is helping coordinate our communication networks. Even the gaseous Zillion are happy in the storm systems we found for them." It had been an incredible few months, but it had also been costly. 3 of their ships had been destroyed by Council forces, and they had lost over 100 volunteers. Each rescue was more dangerous than the last as the Council got better at predicting their movements. Captain Yoon Soo-yoon entered the command center, her face grim. She had just returned from attempting to rescue the plant-like Verdani from their dying forest world. "We were too late," she reported. "Council forces were waiting for us. They had 3 battle cruisers and a support fleet. We managed to save about 50,000 Verdani, but..." She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "There were 10 million on that world, Jaewook. 10 million. The room fell silent. Everyone knew the risks of what they were doing, but losing an entire species still hurt. Jaewook put his hand on Yoon-soo's shoulder. "You saved 50,000 lives," he told her firmly. "That's 50,000 people who get to see tomorrow because of your courage. Don't let the ones we couldn't save make you forget the ones we could." Chief Engineer Taemin Park looked up from his workstation. Over the past months, he had become something like a miracle worker, combining technologies from dozens of different species to create things that shouldn't have been possible. "I've been working with the Vithak crystal matrices and the Nastari biocomputers," he announced. "I think I've found a way to improve our cloaking systems. If this works, we might be able to hide entire fleets from Council sensors." This was typical of how the Lifeline operated. Each rescued species brought their own knowledge and abilities, and Taemin found ways to combine them all. Kalari biotechnology helped their ships heal battle damage. Vithak crystals made their weapons more powerful. Nastari collective intelligence helped them coordinate complex operations across multiple star systems. Dr. Hee-jin Choi had established a medical center in the asteroid base that was unlike anything in the known galaxy. She had doctors from a dozen different species working together, sharing knowledge and techniques that the Council would never allow. "The Zephyrian healing songs can actually accelerate cellular repair," she explained to Jaewook during his weekly medical check. "Combined with Kalari regeneration therapy and human surgical techniques, we're saving people who would have died from injuries that were considered hopeless." But it wasn't just the technology that made the Lifeline special. It was the spirit of cooperation that had developed between all the rescued species. The asteroid base had become a small city where dozens of different forms of life worked and lived together. Jay-Wook often walked through the residential areas, watching Kalari children play with young VTech crystals, while Nistari drones helped elderly Lien maintain their atmospheric chambers. It was everything the galaxy could be if the Council wasn't so focused on keeping species separate and ranked. The peaceful moment was interrupted by an urgent alarm. Sung-Wan Lim, their intelligence officer, called for an emergency meeting. "We've got a problem," he announced as the senior staff gathered. "Shiwu just sent us a coded message. The Council has figured out our communication network. They know we're using the Nistari Collective to coordinate our operations." This was bad news. The Nistari were a hive-minded species that could share thoughts and information instantly across vast distances. Their help had made it possible for the Lifeline fleet to work together, even when they were scattered across multiple star systems. "How much do they know?" Bora asked. "They know we have a base in the Void Nebula, but they don't know exactly where. They know we're using Nistari biotechnology, but they don't know how. And they know we have someone inside the Council feeding us information, but they don't know it's Shiwu yet," Jay-Wook added grimly. Sung-Wan nodded. "Shiwu says they're getting close. The Council has started using telepathic interrogation on all their diplomats. It's only a matter of time before they discover his involvement." "Then we need to get him out," Yunsu said immediately. "It's not that simple," Sung-Wan replied. "Shiwu is in the middle of the Council chambers on their homeworld. It's the most heavily defended location in the galaxy. Even if we could get a ship there without being detected, we'd never be able to extract him." Jay-Wook thought about this problem. Shiwu had risked everything to help them save innocent lives. They couldn't just abandon him. "What if we don't extract him?" he said slowly. "What if we give him something so important that the Council has to focus on that instead of figuring out who's feeding us information?" "What did you have in mind?" Bora asked. "A target they can't ignore. Something so big and so visible that every Council ship in the galaxy will have to respond to it." The plan they came up with was audacious even by Lifeline standards. The Council had recently declared the Corvani species evolutionarily insufficient. The Corvani were facing extinction from a plague that was destroying their immune systems, and the Council had refused to provide medical aid because they considered the species genetically inferior. What made this different was that the Corvani homeworld was in the heart of Council space, surrounded by military installations and patrol fleets. No sane person would try to rescue them, which is exactly why we're going to do it, Jay-Wook explained to his senior staff. "They'll never expect us to be that crazy." The rescue mission required every ship in the Lifeline fleet and the coordination of all their allied species. Vithak crystal technology would hide them from sensors. Nistari, collective intelligence, would coordinate the attack. Kalari biotechnology would help them treat the plague victims during transport. Captain Ari Bayek, who commanded one of their fastest scout ships, volunteered to lead the advance team. "My ship can get close to the Corvani world without being detected," she said. "We'll assess their situation and set up landing coordinates for the main fleet." The mission launched 3 weeks later. 43 ships carrying volunteers from 17 different species, all united by one simple idea: no one should face extinction alone. The journey to Corvani space took 5 days, during which they had to avoid dozens of Council patrol routes. Taemin's new cloaking system worked better than expected, but they all knew that once they started the evacuation, stealth would no longer be possible. When they reached the Corvani system, what they found was heartbreaking. The planet's population had dropped from 50 million to less than 5 million in just 2 years. Entire cities stood empty, and the survivors were gathered in a few overcrowded settlements where they waited to die. The Corvani were humanoid but taller than humans, with pale blue skin and large eyes that seemed to hold all the sadness in the universe. When the Lifeline fleet appeared in their skies, many of them thought they were hallucinating from the plague. Elder Wu Jin, the Corvani leader, met with Jay-Wook in the planet's capital city. Like all his people, he was sick and weak, but his spirit was unbroken. The council told us we were too weak to deserve medical aid, he said through their translation system. They said our genetic structure was flawed and that the galaxy would be better without us. Why would strangers risk their lives to help us when our own galactic neighbors would not? Because we're not strangers, Jawook replied. We're family. All of us. Humans, Kalari, Vithak, Nastari, all the species that the council has abandoned. We stand together, or we fall apart. Dr. Hyojin and her team worked frantically to set up medical stations throughout the city. They had brought medicines and treatments developed from the knowledge of multiple species, and for the first time in months, Corvani children began to recover. The plague isn't natural, Dr. Hyojin reported after analyzing samples. Someone engineered this virus specifically to target Corvani biology. This wasn't extinction by natural causes. This was genocide. The execution was broadcast across every communication channel in the galaxy. Captain Yoon-Soo Yoon and her crew of 23 volunteers stood in chains on the deck of the Council flagship Dominion, their heads held high despite the certainty of death. Jawook watched from the command center of the Lifeline base, his hands clenched into fists as the Council's Supreme Chancellor delivered his speech to the galaxy. Let this be a lesson to all who would defy the natural order, the Chancellor declared, his multiple eyes gleaming with satisfaction. These criminals called themselves heroes, but they were destroyers of peace and stability. They interfered with necessary extinctions and wasted precious resources on inferior species. Yoon-Soo was given a chance to speak before her execution. The woman who had been Jawook's friend for over a decade looked directly into the camera, her voice clear and strong. My name is Captain Yoon-Soo Yoon of the Human Space Fleet, she said. I am about to die because I chose to save lives instead of counting profits. Because I believed that every species deserves a chance to live and grow. Because I stood with the abandoned when no one else would. She paused, looking around at her crew. We are not criminals, we are not terrorists. We are people who refuse to let innocent beings die alone. And we are not afraid, because we know that others will continue our work. The execution was carried out with cold efficiency. 24 good people died in front of the entire galaxy, their only crime being compassion for others. But the Council had made a terrible mistake. They had expected the executions to frighten other species into submission. Instead, they triggered something that hadn't been seen in galactic history for over 1,000 years, a coordinated rebellion. Within hours of the broadcast, uprising began on 17 different worlds. The Kalari survivors on New Kepler attacked Council monitoring stations. The crystalline Vithak shattered Council mining operations on their former worlds. The Nastari collective began spreading revolution through their biocommunication networks. But it wasn't just the rescued species that rebelled. On dozens of Council member worlds, populations that had watched the executions began to question their governments. How many other species had been abandoned? How many extinctions had been allowed to happen for no reason other than prejudice? General In-Ho Cha, commander of the Earth Defense Force, sent Jawook an encrypted message that changed everything. Admiral Kim, he began, using Jawook's new title. I want you to know that Earth Command has officially condemned your actions and called for your arrest. Unofficially, however, I'm sending you the entire Third Fleet. The message included navigation data for 200 human warships that were accidentally going to be in the outer rim systems where they might encounter lifeline forces. The Council has pushed too far, General In-Ho continued. The execution of Captain Yoon and her crew was seen by billions of humans. Our people are demanding action, and the government can't ignore that kind of pressure forever. Similar messages arrived from other species throughout the day. The Altarian Republic was withdrawing from several Council treaties. The Free Worlds Alliance was losing contact with 3 full battle groups. Even some member species of the Council itself were experiencing communication problems with their military forces. Bo-Ra, now promoted to Admiral, coordinated the growing rebel fleet from the asteroid base. The tactical situation was changing by the hour, as more and more ships joined their cause. We have over 800 vessels now, she reported to Jawook. Everything from human destroyers to Thraxian assault ships. The Council fleet still outnumbers us, but not by as much as they think. Taemin had been working around the clock to prepare their forces for the coming battle. The combination of technologies from multiple species had produced weapons and defenses that the Council had never seen before. The bioships are ready, he announced. We've got 50 Kalari vessels that can repair battle damage in real time. The Vithak crystal weapons can cut through any known shield technology, and the Nastari Collective can coordinate our entire fleet like a single organism. Dr. Hyejin had turned her medical facilities into a war hospital, preparing for the casualties that were sure to come. But she had also discovered something that could change the nature of the conflict entirely. I've been analyzing the plague that was used against the Corvani, she told Jaewook privately. It's definitely artificial, but I found something else. The genetic markers suggest it was created using Council bioweapons technology. Can you prove it? Jaewook asked. With the right equipment, yes. But more importantly, I think I can create a cure that will work on all the plague variants they've used against other species. If we can broadcast the formula across the galaxy, we can expose them as genocidal murderers and save millions of lives at the same time, Jaewook finished. The plan that emerged from their war council was bold and desperate. They would split their forces into 3 groups. One would attack the council's main fleet directly, drawing their attention and forces away from their home system. The second would strike at military installations across council space, disrupting their communications and supply lines. The third, and most important, would assault the council homeworld itself. Admiral Bora would lead the main fleet in a massive battle designed to look like humanity's final desperate attack. General Inho's lost Earth Defense Force ships would arrive at the perfect moment to tip the balance and make the deception convincing. Meanwhile, Jaewook would take a small strike force directly to the council chambers. Their mission was to rescue Shiwu, broadcast Dr. Hyejin's plague cure to the galaxy, and expose the council's crimes against abandoned species. The battle began 3 days later in the Nexus system, where the council kept their largest military, base. Bora's fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their mixed technologies creating a light show that was visible from 3 star systems away. The council response was immediate and overwhelming. Over 1,000 warships converged on the system, led by the massive dreadnought classes that each carried enough firepower to destroy entire planets. This is Admiral Bora Lee of the Lifeline Alliance, she broadcast on all frequencies as the battle was joined. We fight for every species that has been abandoned, every life that has been deemed worthless, every child who is told they don't deserve to exist. Today, we show the galaxy that the weak can become strong when they stand together. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Traditional military tactics meant nothing when bioships could heal from direct hits, and crystal weapons could cut through the strongest armor. The Nastari Collective turned the rebel fleet into a single coordinated organism, while human adaptability and courage kept them fighting against impossible odds. Captain Dongwu John led a squadron of modified human fighters in a direct assault on a council command ship. His last transmission was heard across the entire battlefield, for Yunsu and all the others who died for doing what was right. Meanwhile, Jaewook's strike force used the chaos of the main battle to slip past council defenses and reach their home world. The planet was a fortress protected by energy shields and orbital defense platforms, but Taemin had a solution. Nastari biotechnology can mimic any known ship design, he explained as their small fleet approached the planet. As far as their sensors know, we're a council patrol returning from the battle. The deception worked long enough to get them through the outer defenses, but as soon as they landed near the council chambers, alarms began sounding across the city. Jaewook led a team of volunteers into the massive crystalline building where the galaxy's fate had been decided for thousands of years. They fought their way through corridors filled with council guards, their mixed species team using abilities that their enemies couldn't predict. Seung-Wan Lim used Thraxian stealth techniques to disable security systems. Captain Ari Bayek and her Kalari-trained medics kept the wounded fighting. Engineer Woojin Kang used Vithak crystal technology to cut through barriers that should have been impenetrable. They found Shiwu in the detention level, barely conscious after days of telepathic Interrogation. But he was alive, and more importantly, he had information that could end the war. The plague formulas, he whispered as Dr. Hai-Jin treated his injuries. I copied everything before they caught me. Not just the Corvani plague, all of them. Every engineered extinction they've caused in the past century. With Shiwu's data and Dr. Hai-Jin's medical expertise, they were able to broadcast the truth to the galaxy. The cures for dozens of artificial plagues, the genetic evidence of council bioweapons, the records of species that had been murdered rather than abandoned, all of it went out on every communication channel in known space. The effect was immediate. On worlds throughout the galaxy, populations that had been told their neighbors died from natural causes learned that they had been murdered by their own government. Military units began defecting. Entire sectors declared independence. The 1,000-year reign of the Council was crumbling in real time. But the Council's leaders weren't finished. As Jaewook's team fought their way back to their ships, the building's main chamber erupted in a flash of terrible light. 5 years had passed since the fall of the old Galactic Council, and the galaxy looked nothing like it had before. Where once there had been rigid hierarchies and abandoned species, now there was something unprecedented in galactic history: true cooperation. Elder Admiral Bo-Ra Lee stood on the observation deck of New Terra Station, watching the construction of humanity's greatest achievement. The massive space station served as the capital of the new Galactic Alliance, and it was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Kalari biotechnology grew living quarters that adapted to each species' needs. Vithak crystal networks provided unlimited, clean energy. Nestari collective intelligence coordinated construction across millions of different tasks. The memorial section is almost complete, reported Captain Yejun Oh, who had taken over coordination of the station's construction. Representatives from 200 species have contributed something to honor those who died in the war. Bo-Ra nodded, her thoughts turning to old friends who hadn't lived to see this day. Jaewook would have loved seeing what had grown from the seeds he planted with that first Kalari rescue. Dr. Hyejin Choi joined them at the observation window, her hair now streaked with gray, but her eyes still bright with the passion that had driven her to save lives across the galaxy. The medical corps graduation ceremony is tomorrow, she reported. We're certifying doctors from 47 species this time. They'll be able to practice medicine anywhere in the Alliance, using techniques from all our member civilizations. This was typical of how the new galaxy worked. Instead of keeping knowledge secret or using it to maintain advantages over other species, the Alliance shared everything. Medical techniques, engineering solutions, agricultural methods, all of it was freely available to anyone who needed it. Chief Engineer Taemin Park, now director of the Cooperative Technology Institute, had aged more than the others, but his mind was as sharp as ever. His latest project was ambitious even by Alliance standards. We're ready to test the Deep Space Communication Network, he announced during their daily briefing. If this works, we'll be able to maintain instant contact with exploration fleets, operating beyond the galactic rim. The Alliance had been receiving distress signals from outside the galaxy for months now. Apparently, word of their existence had spread to other galactic clusters where oppressed species faced their own versions of the old council. Shi Wu-Han, now director of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, had spent the past 5 years helping former council worlds adapt to the new reality. It hadn't been easy work. Many species had trouble accepting that beings they had considered inferior were now their equals. The Raxan Empire has agreed to full reparations for the species they helped abandon, he reported. They're also opening their historical archives, so we can identify other groups that might have survived in hiding. This was important work. Every few months, Alliance exploration teams discovered new colonies of supposedly extinct species. Some had fled to remote systems during the old council's reign. Others had been secretly protected by sympathetic individuals who couldn't openly challenge the system. The memorial ceremony took place on the 5th anniversary of the Battle of Nexus, where so many heroes had given their lives for the cause of galactic freedom. Representatives from every Alliance species gathered in the station's central plaza, a vast space that could accommodate beings as large as the whale-like Satani, and as small as the insect-like microns. Admiral Bo-Ra delivered the opening address, her words translated into over 300 languages simultaneously by Nastari biocomputers. "We gather today not just to remember the dead but to celebrate the living," she began. 5 years ago, the galaxy was ruled by fear. Fear of difference, fear of change, fear of helping others because it might make us look weak. She gestured to the crowd around her, where children of dozens of species played together while their parents listened to the ceremony. "Look around you now. See what we've built together. Not a galaxy ruled by the strongest, but a community where everyone contributes their unique gifts to help others." The memorial wall was unlike anything that had ever existed. Instead of just listing names, it told the stories of those who had died. Captain Un Soo-yoon's section included recordings of Kalari children singing songs about the human captain who saved their people. Admiral Jae-wook Kim's memorial showed pictures of the dozens of species that existed because he chose compassion over safety. But the most moving part of the ceremony was when the survivors spoke. Elder Dasam of the Kalari, now over 100 years old by human standards, stood slowly and addressed the crowd. "When our world was dying, we thought we would face the end alone," she said, her voice still strong despite her age. "But then Captain Kim and his crew arrived and taught us something we had never known. That family isn't about blood or species. Family is about choosing to stand together when everything else falls apart." Similar testimonies came from rescued species across the galaxy. The Corvani had developed new medicines that could cure diseases affecting 30 different species. The gaseous Zlian had created atmospheric processors that could terraform dead worlds. The crystalline Vithak had learned to grow living computers that could solve problems no single mind could handle. Young Captain Ha-yoon Kim, Jae-wook's niece who had joined the Alliance fleet after Earth officially recognized the new government, delivered the closing speech of the ceremony. "My uncle used to say that humanity's greatest strength wasn't our technology or our weapons," she told the assembled crowd. "It was our refusal to let others suffer alone. Today, that strength belongs to all of us." As the formal ceremony ended, Bo-Ra walked through the memorial gardens that had been created throughout the station. Each area was designed by different species to honor their concept of memory and hope. The human section was simple but powerful. A wall of black stone with the names of the fallen, surrounded by flowers from Earth that had been modified to grow in artificial gravity. The Kalari had created a living reef where bioluminescent organisms spelled out poems about sacrifice and renewal. The Vithak Memorial was a forest of singing crystals that played harmonies composed from the last words of their war dead. But Bo-Ra's favorite memorial was the newest one. The Corvani had designed a garden where families could plant seeds in honor of lost loved ones. Over the past year, it had grown into a beautiful park where children played while their parents remembered those who made their freedom possible. As she walked through the garden, Bo-Ra was surprised to see a familiar face. Kyung-Soo Lee, an architect from Earth who had designed many of the station's memorial spaces, was kneeling beside a small tree he had planted. "For Captain Yoon?" Bo-Ra asked gently. Kyung-Soo nodded. "Yoon-Soo and I were friends in the academy. She always said she wanted to see every species in the galaxy living together in peace. I thought she'd like knowing that children from dozens of worlds are playing in her memory." As if summoned by their conversation, a group of young beings came running through the garden. Kalari tadpoles swam through floating pools while human children climbed crystal formations grown by young Vithak. Nastari larvae communicated through bioelectrical patterns with gaseous Zillion offspring who sparkled like living stars. This was the future that Jae-wook and Yoon-Soo had died for, Bo-Ra realized. Not just the absence of war, but the presence of hope. The peaceful moment was interrupted by an urgent communication from the station's command center. Admiral Soo-bin No, who had survived the war and now commanded the Alliance exploration fleet, had important news. "Admiral Lee," she reported, "we're receiving a massive distress signal from outside the galaxy. It's not just one species. It sounds like an entire galactic civilization is under attack." Bo-Ra felt a familiar stirring in her heart, the same feeling that had driven Jae-wook to answer the original Kalari distress call, and that had motivated Thousands of beings to risk their lives for strangers. How far away? She asked. About 6 months' travel at maximum speed. But Admiral, we'd be going into completely unknown space with no support and no way to call for help if things go wrong. Bora looked around the memorial garden, where children from across the galaxy played together in perfect harmony. Then she looked up at the stars visible through the station's transparent dome, knowing that somewhere out there, other children were facing extinction while the universe did nothing. Prepare the fleet, she decided. All volunteer ships and crews only. We're not ordering anyone to take this risk. How many ships do you think we'll get? Subin asked. The answer came over the next 48 hours as Alliance vessels from across the galaxy began arriving at New Terra Station. Human ships, Kalari biovessels, Vithak crystal craft, Nistari collective cruisers. Over 1,000 ships crewed by beings who had once faced extinction themselves and now refused to let others face it alone. The departure ceremony was brief but meaningful. Bora stood on the bridge of the Persistence II, a new ship named in honor of Jawook's vessel, and looked out at the massive fleet assembled around her. This is Admiral Bora Lee to all ships, she broadcast. 5 years ago, one human captain answered a distress call from people he had never met. That single act of compassion changed the galaxy. Today, we carry that same spirit to the stars beyond our own.